John Henry, originally written by Roark, Bradford, adapted by Stephen Krensky, illustrations by Mark Oldroyd. Nobody ever said for sure that John Henry was born with a hammer in his hand, but nobody ever said he wasn't either. He always seemed to be holding one. That was a fact. While other babies were grabbing onto fingers and toes, young John was busy grabbing hammers. These weren't big hammers, of course. They weighed 4 or 5 pounds at most. John dragged them around behind him, digging ruts in the dirt. Then his papa taught him to walk up and down the cotton fields in straight lines. In that way, Papa could plant seeds in the ruts afterward. By and by, John grew strong enough to lift his hammer. The first thing he did was swing it around. It was the second thing he did too, and the third. Left, right, up, down. John Henry was not too picky. He just liked the feel of the hammer in his hand and the whooshing sound it made cutting through the air. At first, John didn't have much control. He'd swing the hammer this way and smash it into a chair. He'd swing the hammer that way and break a few dishes. After a while, his mama made John swing his hammer outside. There was a lot more room, and things weren't so delicate. Still, all the trees on the Henry farm had dings and dents. They showed where young John had passed by. One day, John's folks got the notion of putting his swinging to good use. They taught John to pound fence posts into the ground. John took to the job straight away. He started with small picket fences, and soon he moved on to bigger things. Up and down the county John went, planting fence posts wherever they were needed. John hardly ever stopped for a rest. If his right hand needed a break, he simply shifted to his left. Sometimes he used both hands to hit 2 posts at the same time. Nobody would match John Henry once he got rolling. Folks came from all around to watch him. He was a wonder, no doubt about it. John Henry liked building fences, tall or short, picket or post. It made no difference to him. All he wanted was to stay busy. Folks could hear John whistling as he marched to work. He probably whistled at work too, but it was hard to be sure. John's pounding hammer made so much noise. Around this time, the railroad began to cut through the countryside. The railroad had to be built track by track. The railroad company was always looking for a strong man who could pound a hammer. It was hard to miss John Henry. He stood a head above most men. Rocks looked soft next to the muscles in his arms. The railroad's foreman was in charge of the workers. He had already hired some powerfully strong men. One fellow could split nails into a board so hard that he didn't need a hammer. Another worker was so strong that he bent a rail into a heart for his favorite cow. But nobody could match John Henry. His job was to pound stakes into the ground or solid rock. When the stakes were removed, they left behind holes. Other workers filled the holes with explosives. Each blast blew away part of a hill or a mountain in the railroad's way. Other men needed 4 or 5 whacks to drive in a stake. John Henry and his 14-pound hammers needed only 1. Swish went the air as John's hammers swung by. Clang went the stake as the hammer drove it home. The ground shook from the blows in every direction. Folks who didn't know better thought a giant was passing by. Once John found his rhythm, his hammerheads glowed burning red. A few even melted right off their handles. When John remembered, he cooled off his hammers in a lake or stream. Then sometimes the stream rose so high people feared a volcano had erupted. John loved working for the railroad. He liked seeing the tracks grow across the countryside. Each night, he went to sleep, dreaming of the trains to come. Each day morning, he awoke, ready to make that day come a little sooner. Big Bend Tunnel. Thanks to John Henry, the railroad was laying down track way ahead of schedule. John was never one to brag though. He let the sound of his stakes to do his speaking for him. Of course, not everyone gave John Henry credit for doing all the work himself. Some people said the rocks were afraid of him. They claimed that the rocks shuddered in nervousness just at the news John was coming. John Henry only smiled when he heard such things. If he knew better, he kept it to himself. But ordinary rocks were not John Henry's only problem. Looming in the distance was Big Bend Mountain. It was too big to go around, and it was too steep to go over. So all the railroad could do was keep going straight. That meant digging a tunnel right through the middle. Now, Big Bend Mountain wasn't the tallest mountain anyone had ever seen, and it wasn't the widest, but everyone agreed right off that it was the most ordinary mountain east of the Mississippi River. The first time someone tried to pound in a stake, it snapped into two. The second time, the stake crumpled up like an accordion, and even when the stakes went in, they barely made a dent. It was almost like the mountain was laughing at them. More than 2 years went by and still the tunnel wasn't done. John Henry himself was clearing 10 to 12 feet a day. The air was filled with dust and smoke. It was so hard to see, the workers never knew if the sun was shining or not. On rainy days, the soot and mud stuck to everyone. Then men looked like statues come to life. The work was dangerous too. Dozens of men were hurt or killed building the tunnel. But the men who were left weren't about to give up. One day, a salesman showed up in the railroad camp. He looked fancy. He talked fancy, and he had with him a fancy steam power drill. Big Bend Mountain was still causing a whole lot of trouble. It was no wonder that the foreman stopped to listen. This was no ordinary drill, the salesman claimed. It was a truly amazing machine. It could make the work go faster. It could outdig any man alive. Why, a machine like this was better than 10 men. John Henry could hardly believe his ears. He stepped right up to speak. A machine couldn't be a part of a team, he said, and it took a team to build a railroad. The salesman had said the machine could be 10 men. How about just one? John would like to see the drill try to beat him, so the railroad set up a contest to see who was right. How many 3-foot holes could John Henry and the drill make in an hour? The whole camp gathered round to watch. The salesman ran the drill down one track, and John Henry began pounding his 14-pound hammers down another. Well, they went at it all morning. The steam-powered drill hissed and whined like a caged animal. John Henry was quieter. He whistled softly in rhythm with his blows, but the sweat washing down his back made little rivers in the dirt. Soon the dust rose up as thick as a deep fog. It was hard to see clearly, but everyone could still hear the cold steel of John Henry's hammers and the whirring of the steam drill. At noon, the contest ended. The dust settled, all holes were measured. The steam drill had dug 3 holes, as round and clean as you please. But John Henry looked back over 5 holes of his own. That made him the winner. John Henry raised his arms in victory. His fellow workers stomped and cheered. but the price of winning was high. Even before the last years passed away, John staggered on his feet, and the crowd grew suddenly quiet. John took one more step, then he fell to the ground. His hammer still gripped tight. The foreman rushed right up, but there was nothing anyone could do. John Henry was gone. The machine couldn't beat him, but it had cost him his life. The Big Ben Tunnel has long been done, and the trains passing through it don't mark the spot where John Henry fell. But some folks say that if you listen hard at either end, you can still hear his hammers pounding away in the dark. John Henry's tale may have come from the lives of real-life workers. These African-American men were born as slaves before the Civil War, 1861-1865. They grew up to be free men working for the railroad. Like John Henry, these men helped build America's railways. They succeeded through their own strength, not through the power of machines. Over time, their work was done, and over time, John Henry became a legend.